Hello, and welcome to our series, Conversations on Zionism, Reclaiming the Narrative. I'm Russell Robinson, Chief Executive Officer of Jewish National Fund USA. The time has come to be the voice of what Zionism really is. We're exposing the beautiful and diverse facets and facts of Zionism. Join me on this journey, together with Conversations on Zionism, Reclaiming the Narrative. This is Zionism. Here with me today is Ruth Nahum, the Deputy Mayor of Yerushalayim, the capital of our Jewish nation. She oversees tourism, economic and international development, business relations, and diaspora affairs. Fleur is a lifelong activist from Gibraltar to Jerusalem. She is the co-founder of the UAE-Israel Business Council and the Gulf Israel Women's Forum, pursuing cooperation in technology, business, and tourism. Please welcome Fleur Nahum. Fleur, welcome to ZTV, to the Zionism Studios, to our show. I did an introduction. I said from Gibraltar to Jerusalem. So I'm going to start our show to talk about Gibraltar, your leadership, and a little bit about who you are and your family leadership. How did you become such an activist, and where did Gibraltar come into the picture?
So it's so wonderful to be with you here, Russell, and I love what you do here and these conversations. They're very, very important. So I'll tell you a little bit about myself. The reason I'm from Gibraltar, my family are originally Spanish Jews who in the 18th century, deciding not to stay in Spain to either be killed or forcibly converted, they wound up around the Iberian Peninsula. And when Gibraltar became British, they asked the Jews to move back to Gibraltar because they turned it into a military base. And so they knew Jews were merchants, and so they called on the Jews to come and move to Gibraltar. These are very different times. It's like almost 400 years ago. And so my family moved to Gibraltar 400 years ago.
400 years ago, Spanish origin. It's a fascinating story about the Jewish people, where we've come from, where we've gone, where we built. And your leadership comes from you, but there's a little DNA there. Tell us about it.
That's what they keep telling me. So basically, my father, Sir Joshua Hassan, was the first mayor of Gibraltar and the first prime minister, chief minister, they call it there, of Gibraltar. And the reason that he was all this is because him and his friends basically brought autonomy, some autonomy and self-determination. Gibraltar was a colony with zero rights for people. My father was the person who set up the first civil rights group, civil rights that understood that they couldn't be completely independent because they would be run over by Spain. They're too small to be completely independent. So instead, they went for as much autonomy and self-government that they can possibly have. And so that went from a city council to a parliament. And so my father was the first mayor of Gibraltar, then he was the first head of government in Gibraltar, and he was in power for 40 years. So when I was born, he was already that, and that's all I knew. But my father was a really special person in that he was very, very humble, and he didn't think that he was any more special than anybody else, and in fact raised us that way. And so at 2 or 3 in the morning, if people had problems and they'd show up at the door in my house, my father and my mother would receive them and would help them. And so I grew up with a really strong sense of public service. But I didn't set out to have a political career. I didn't move to Israel thinking, oh, I'm gonna be a politician. I moved to Israel because I'm a big Zionist, because I believe that I wanted to be part of, this incredible miracle and the fact that the Jewish people have self-determination, self-rule after 2,500 years. I wanted to be a part of that. I didn't think I'm going to go to Israel and become a politician. That kind of manifested itself. And that's how I got here.
But I'll let you unpack it. What was that moment, growing up, you have values, and we'll talk about your family's values as you explained it, how it ties in with Zionism. But what was your moment to say, you know what, I need to be living in Israel?
Oh, well, I came to Israel for the first time when I was 14 years old. My cousin met an Israeli and was going to marry him. And so the whole family came over for the wedding. It was winter. And I just fell in love with the country. I just loved it. And when I went home, I started reading. Yes, in those days we used to read. So when I started home, I started reading. And the first, and I was always into kind of the female leadership type of thing. And the first book that I decided to read was Golda Meir's autobiography, My Life, which I read as a 14, 15-year-old girl, and it truly had an impact on me. And I understood that we're in a really special place in our history as a people. And I wanted to be a part of that. I wanted to be part of that common destiny. And so that's how I became a Zionist. And I always thought I was going to move to Israel. Every summer I would spend in Israel during my college years, doing different things here. And I was always there. I guess what made it more concrete was when I was doing I'm a lawyer by profession, when I was doing my stage, my internship to become a lawyer. I met my husband, and on the second date, he's like, listen, I have to tell you something. I'm like, oh my God, what's he going to confess? He said, I don't want to stay here. I want to move to Israel. I'm like, me too. And that was that.
That was a good aha moment.
That was a good moment when I'm like, thank God not only did I find the right person for me, but the right person for me also wants to move to Israel like me. So that was when the dream became concrete.
You are the deputy mayor of the city of Yerushalayim. And I say it slowly because I want our audience to understand a woman, a traditional woman. How is Jerusalem a woman, Zionism? Connect that for us, Flora.
I think it all makes a lot of sense. So first of all, in Israel, I think that what somebody like me will always be is an immigrant. And that is something that when people ask me, is it hard to be a woman in politics? No, it's hard to be a person who wasn't raised here in politics, because there is a language I don't speak. It's not Hebrew. I speak Hebrew. There is always this kind of common, I see it with my children. My children were born here. They've got a language of being raised here, cultural language. I don't know how to explain it. There are things that I don't get, that I will never get. And so to me, that is the most challenging thing about being a politician in Israel, that there is this kind of language of growing up here that I don't speak. To be a woman, it's interesting because I never saw being a woman, I never saw being a woman as a disadvantage. I definitely think that we have to work harder. I don't see that as a disadvantage. And I think that there are a lot of things pitted against us. And the biggest thing pitted against women in politics, I would say, is that everybody underestimates you. From the get-go, if you're a woman, you're not taken seriously. When you're a woman and you argue something, you're getting emotional. You're getting hysterical. When you're a woman and you feel passionate about something, again, it's these same labels. But mostly they dismiss you. Mostly they're like, she was the token. They needed a woman, so they picked her. Nobody, when they see you and they understand that you're a woman in politics, in general, you're not taken as seriously as a man is. Your ambition is somehow derided for being something negative. Who does she think she is? I get this all the time. Who does she think she is? Never would a man be considered in the same way. They wouldn't say, who does he think he is? It's always, who does she think she is? Because ambition for a woman is somehow seen as something not desirable or not something a woman should be aiming towards. And so you have all these things pitted against you, not taken seriously enough, having to work harder to prove yourself. I'm fine with all of that. But, you have to also look at the advantages. And the advantages are that I think women have qualities that are incredibly suitable to leadership. And people don't talk about that. And when they talk about COs and their EQ instead of their IQ, and when they talk about all these, let's develop all these soft skills, we don't have to develop all these soft skills. We were born with them. We're good listeners, we're good empathizers, we're good bridge builders, we're good peace builders. Now, these are incredibly important traits for leadership. So this is why I don't see it as a disadvantage to be a woman. I see it as an advantage to be a woman. And even the underestimation I see as an advantage, because when you are underestimated, they don't see you coming. And that is a good political advantage, I can tell you. And so I try and not, put my ego aside and say, okay, yeah, they don't take me seriously. Yeah, but this actually helps me. And this is how I approach being a woman in Jerusalem.
As students who aren't necessarily Jewish, getting to go on Caravan for Democracy allows us to speak in a way to the nuance of Israel.
You're talking about politics, as a woman in Jerusalem, in the state of Israel. I understand from our enemies, this can't be this discussion. A woman has those kind of rights, has the ability to become a deputy mayor of the city of Jerusalem. I thought Israel is that other kind of a country. So I'm going to let you unpack that a little bit more for our people out there, because I found it fascinating. The discussion, woman, deputy mayor of Jerusalem, going political career. How does that mesh with what the others say about our land of Israel?
Well, people who don't think that everybody has equal rights here, doesn't know what's going on in the country, is completely ignorant. Israel is a democracy with an excellent arms of government, an excellent judiciary, that really fights for individual liberties, rights, and opportunities. But I would say even more than that, Russell, what people don't seem to understand is that Zionism is actually a feminist undertaking. And I'll explain to you why. This is a little theory I have that, again, people don't think about this because they don't equate Israel like this, because we're in the Middle East, maybe because our neighbors have zero rights for women, but we are a beacon of democracy and human rights in the middle of, a very different type of region. And so maybe that's why people get confused. In 1894, when Herzl had the first Zionist Congress, women were nowhere else in the world could women vote. no organization and no country could women vote. Women did not have the vote anywhere in 1894. And yet, when the Zionist Congress first convened, women were given voting rights equal to men. And so from the get-go, Zionism is a feminist endeavor, as far as I'm concerned, because they gave womankind equal rights through the vote. And the whole history of the early Zionism, the early Zionist work, was a history of equality of men and women. Women were representatives in the Zionist Congress, in the Zionist, in the World Zionist Organization, and women took a very significant role in building of this country. When the men were out dealing with the diplomacy, and when the men were out dealing with how Israel was going to, before we were Israel, how we were going to defend ourselves from our enemies, the women were building the infrastructure for the social welfare medical system that Israel still has today. Women like Vera Weitzman, women like Rebecca Seif, these were the women who created WITSO. What about the women who created Hadassah? When Israel, before Israel existed, before Israel was our own sovereign country and we were building the infrastructure for a state, the women realized that whilst the men were out fighting, babies were dying and mothers were dying, and there was abject poverty and there was no food. It was the women who had their eyes on what was going on the ground. And it was the women who said, we can't be fighting for a population that's going to die because of public health standards. And they created the first hospitals, baby well clinics, food programs. They went out and they retrained as farmers. Women retrained as farmers before 1948 in order to make the country grow. And so this is Zionism. This is where we come from. And so we can't forget that these are our roots. And so women, not only is it not strange that we should be in leadership positions here in the country, in the city, we have to take these leadership positions because that is the DNA of how we were created.
So, Flora, it's fascinating. Really, not only is Zionism not racism, Zionism is the beginning of the women's movement of the world. It's so fascinating. And you, as the deputy mayor, are fighting for minority rights in Jerusalem. So that's not what the world hears. You know, it's Human Rights Watch and the rest of the anti-Jewish movement. So, Flora, tell us some of the fights that you have for minority rights.
Yeah, look, you can't take these groups seriously because all they're doing is trying to malign us. And that comes from a very deep place of anti-Semitism, because anybody who is anti-Zionist is anti-Semitic. Why, if you believe that the Jewish people are the only people in the world who should not have self-determination in their ancestral homeland, then you're an anti-Semite. I don't see it as any other way. And I've said this, by the way, in international press. If you believe that we're the only people who don't have indigenous rights, then you're an anti-Semite because you're fighting for everybody else. But of course, we're left out. So putting that aside for a second, Jerusalem is a very interesting place. And this is why I feel so privileged to be one of its deputy mayors. Jerusalem is the most diverse city in the country. So we have 40% Arab population. We have a 25% ultra-Orthodox Jews population, about 2% Christian. Christian is small and it's growing, and we're helping them grow here in the city. So that is the city of Jerusalem. Now that is double the percentages of the minorities in the rest of the country. So in the rest of the country, ultra-Orthodox are 12%, here 25%. In the rest of the country, Arabs are 20%, here 40%. And for me, everybody, they're all my constituents. Even if you don't vote for me, you're my constituent. And this is what I learned from my father. My father served the people who voted for him and the people who didn't vote for him in exactly the same way. That's how I've been raised. And so for me, the Arab population who've been let down by their leadership, with anti-normalization brainwashing so that they're not part of Jerusalem. We're working directly with the grassroots in order to bring opportunity, to bring quality jobs, to bring better education, to bring infrastructural development. We're creating a whole high-tech park there. We call it Silicon Valley. Valley is in Arabic Valley. And we're doing all these things in order to embrace the Arab population into the prosperity of the startup nation. And they're really responding very well. That's one of the things that I'm involved with. And the other thing is, of course, the ultra-Orthodox Jews. Again, ultra-Orthodox men are let down by their leaders in the sense that they don't teach them core curriculum subjects, and we're going around their leaders to try and give them all the opportunities they can to choose what they want to do in life. We're not telling them what to do. What we want to do is give them options. And the religious and political leadership of the Arab community of East Jerusalem have been doing everything in their power not to give them options, not to teach them Hebrew, not to mix with the very people who want to embrace them into opportunity. And to an extent, the ultra-Orthodox also. Their leadership do not teach boys math beyond 11 in order for them not to have those options, not to be integrated into society. So for these religious and political reasons, these communities are being held back. And so we're doing a lot of work in trying to open the doors for these communities and helping them walk through those doors.
There's no better gift to give or receive than one that can connect you with nature and your homeland. JNF has made it super easy for you to order your tree certificate online. Just go to jnf.org/trees, pick which special occasion it's for, order your tree online, and let's get planting. Every tree counts.
So just for clarity for our audience, you have a city council. What's its makeup?
So this is also part of the challenge because the ultra-Orthodox, who are 25% of the city, make up almost 50% of the city council because they have double the voter turnout that the rest of the city has. You know, their leaders say to them, you have to go and vote for A, B, and C. They don't even know who they're voting for. They will go out and vote for A, B, and C. The rest of the population, unfortunately, vote 32% voter turnout for local elections, which is really, really low. The ultra-Orthodox get to 72%. And so for those reasons, they are very prominent in city council. And I don't have a problem with anybody, but as long as they don't infringe on my rights. But I'm also fighting for budgets for the LGBT community that I have to negotiate and do, acrobatics in order to get the ultra-Orthodox to leave the room when we pass those budgets, because they will never vote in favor. And so because they won't vote in favor, we have to cajole them into leaving the room so that we can get the budget passed. And so and women's rights and things like that. So we have a lot of challenges because of this very, very, very conservative, with a small c, community, which controls almost half of the votes in City Hall. And meanwhile, the Arabs have no city council representatives because they have chosen not to vote. They can vote, they should vote. Many of their young people want to start voting, but they've been brainwashed by their leadership not to vote because voting is a statement on sovereignty. But meanwhile, as my mother would say, they're cutting their nose to spite their face, because if they don't have representation, they can't get more resources for their community. It's left to pluralists like me to fight for them as well as everybody else. If they had their own elected city council members, they would be doing much better as well. And so you have intransigence, anti-normalization, ultra-Orthodoxy. You have all of this melting pot in City Hall. You should come, Russell. It's a lot of fun to watch.
Well, I'm so happy that you described it that way, because I'm trying, the image that you present is democracy with a big D. And it is everything that people don't talk about. I want to move our conversation to an international platform, because you on the international platform were one of the first that was dealing with the UAE and the other countries before the Abraham Accords. You have developed business leadership and business connections between Jerusalem, Israel, and the UAE, and women's leadership program. Talk to us about that evolution and what does it mean today, and how does that tie in to Zionism and us as a Jewish people?
Absolutely. That, I think, is one of the most exciting things to happen here in the region. I don't think people in America actually understand how significant and meaningful the Abraham Accords have been. Mainly, maybe because it was brought forth by the previous administration. I don't know what it is, but I was very friendly with as you know, Russell, the American embassy, because you were there. The American embassy was officially moved to its rightful capital, Jerusalem, a couple of years ago. And with that came the administration here in the city with the Ambassador David Friedman and his incredible team. And I was talking to them very closely about ways of advancing the Arab community in the city of Jerusalem. And they were very, very helpful. And they are very involved in lots of different Jewish Arab things going on in the city. And I understood through these conversations that something was cooking with the Gulf. At the same time, I've got a very close friend, Doran Barak, he's an LA Israeli Jew, who basically said to me, he's been doing business in the Gulf for many, many years. And he said to me, Fleur, I'm telling you, the next horizon for Israel is the Gulf. These are the people we need to be making peace with. And so all of these things together, in June of 2020, we said, why don't we try and create a platform for encouraging under the radar normalization between Israel and the UAE. And so we set up this UAE-Israel Business Council. Little did we know that a month later, the Accords were going to be announced. The Abraham Accords were announced. And so once the Abraham Accords were announced, within a week, we had the first digital platform for connecting UAE and Israel business people. We really believe in this endeavor. And within a few short weeks, Russell, we had thousands of people on this platform wanting to reach out to each other. And not just Israelis wanting to reach out to the Emiratis, and people living in the UAE wanting to reach out to Israel. It was incredible. It's like the leadership did a very brave thing, but once they did, it was like whoosh, everything came together. And we were really leading this. I was the first politician post Abraham Accords to visit the UAE and Bahrain. And a few weeks into this, myself and a friend decided that we needed for women to lead this, because if we want to create a warm, sustainable peace, women have to be leading this, because we do this very well. We create very strong bonds very quickly. We open up and share very quickly. And we have our own language, women. And so we created the Gulf Israel Women's Forum. And I'm so proud that the first ever physical meeting, because it was the middle of the COVID, the first ever physical meeting between Emiratis and Israelis post Abraham Accords was actually my Gulf Israel Women's Forum. We met on Erev Simchat Torah, just before Simchat Torah high holiday, in a hotel. We didn't know what to expect. We were all very nervous. And we sat around a table and just shared our hopes and dreams for our children living in a better region. The picture became an iconic picture, went around the world, CNN, everyone was talking about this meeting. And I'm just so proud that it was women leading the charge of this warm and sustainable peace, which is and will change the region. If there's any light of hope here, it's coming from these Abraham Accords.
So, Fleur, help us by giving us the future in your eyes? What do you see for the diaspora, for the people of Israel, Zionism, for our connection? How do you see tomorrow?
That's a wonderful question, and I think about this a lot. And I think there's a lot of elements to Zionism. It's very sad, Russell, and this is why what you're doing here is so important, that Zionism has been given, the word Zionism has been given such a negative brand, when in fact it's all about equality and rights, and indigenous rights and heritage and connection to the land. That's what the word should be about. But when you analyze the Zionist writings of many of the founding fathers and mothers, what you will see is that Zionism is also about Israel being a light unto the nation. Now, what is the light unto the nation that we are today? We're developing technologies that are fixing the world. That's a light to our nation, to the other nations. We are creating technologies that are helping people who can't walk to walk, people who can't see to see. We are developing solar energy. We are fixing water scarcity problems. These are the incredible innovations that are coming out of Israel. And it's not just staying in our small country of 9 million people. This is a small market. Our innovations are fixing the world. They're fixing the main challenges of our world. And specifically with the Abraham Accords, our technologies are fixing the common regional challenges that we have with our Gulf neighbors and with our Arab neighbors. We are the source of those innovations that are creating the solutions for those very, very real challenges, such as food security, water security, energy, such as cybersecurity. The answers are coming from here. And so this is why the Abraham Accords are so important, and this is what Zionism actually means.
So, Fleur, from Gibraltar to Jerusalem, from a 14-year-old who read a book, Golda, I'm going to tell our audience the chapter is going to be written by another woman, Fleur. As you move forward, the leadership, as a woman, as a Jew, as a great leader of the Jewish people, as now the deputy mayor of Yerushalayim, I thank you for being a guiding light for us and continue. And we're looking for that light to keep lighting the way for all of us around the world. And I thank you for your leadership. To watch this and all of our past episodes, go to ZTV, our Zionism Studios YouTube page, and subscribe to get notifications.